Hi, I'm Manisha Priyadarshan and welcome to another episode of She Means Business, Biz2Credit's video series on women's leadership. Today's guest is the owner of one of Manhattan's hottest restaurants, Smack, Sarita Ekya. How are you doing today, Sarita?
I'm doing well, thank you.
So Sarita, you were trained as an engineer and you took a jump into becoming an entrepreneur. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that transition?
Yeah, it seems like a lifetime ago in some ways. This was 12 years ago, so this was 2005, and my husband and I had both quit our engineering jobs in New Hampshire to move to New York City. The intention was just because we wanted to live and be in Manhattan. And we landed a sublet in the East Village and just promised each other that we wouldn't take jobs unless we loved them or we ran out of money. And we had about 3 months worth of money saved up. So, you know, we had a little bit of time. And we started to eat out at niche restaurants, restaurants in general, but we were really gravitating towards niche restaurants. And also being in the East Village of Manhattan, there's so many of these little kind of hole in the walls that pick one item and do it so well. And it just, you know, it was this kind of, the timing was right, and I came up with this idea at the peanut butter company in the West Village. All they did was peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, and at the time it seemed so awesome and so crazy to us. Now I look back, I'm like, of course there was a place that did that, right? But basically I came up with this idea for us to go and check out a restaurant that only did mac and cheese, because we had tried that place, we had tried a grilled cheese place, and I was kind of thinking along the lines of comfort food. And lo and behold, we started looking around and there was no place that existed anywhere that we could find, like not even just New York City, anywhere else. And that's how that first kind of dabbling my feet in the water happened. I came up with this idea, couldn't let it go, and literally 9 months later opened up the doors to Smack.
So you went from being an engineer to engineering mac and cheese.
Precisely, yeah.
So being a restaurant owner, you know, that's an incredible process. It takes a lot of effort, a lot of time, a lot of work. Why don't you tell us a little bit about how you stay organized? What are, you know, the top 3 things that kind of keep you afloat?
I think that, you know, looking back on my actual educational training and combined with my personality, there's certain things that definitely help in the restaurant business. Problem solving. We were the first ever place to just do different types of mac and cheese, like that. Yeah, so that was something that we are really not only creating this restaurant from scratch, but also all the processes. And being an engineer, you know, with research and development into ovens, takeout packaging, like to create the model after we opened our doors, we spent the next 3 to 4 years actually modifying everything, because we couldn't have a traditional kitchen. We were seeing lines and volumes and cult followings very luckily from the very beginning, and we realized, oh, this model, we have to create a model that's going to sustain this business, and also we saw that it could be replicable.
So you come from engineering, which is notoriously male dominated, and now, you know, you're in the very competitive restaurant industry in New York City. Why don't you tell us a little bit about some of the challenges that you faced as a woman that's owning a business in New York? Sure.
You know, it's, when you put it that way, I came from one male-dominated industry, went to another one, right? From engineering to restaurants. I think one of the biggest challenges I had, and still have to this day, is I went from working not as my own boss to working as the boss of, you know, the owner of a company, and most of my employees are male, just from sheer numbers of applications that come through. I get more male applications than I do female. And, you know, when issues arise or when any kind of maybe personal situation comes up for an employee, there have been many times where I can sense or even just know the discomfort they have in talking to me. Sometimes it's just due to the sheer fact that I feel like sometimes they're viewing me as like a maternal figure, so they can be embarrassed to share things with me because they see me not only as their boss but like as a mom, which, you know, that can be very tough because, as we know, everyone goes through personal issues, and then sometimes they get brought to work and you have to work those things out. So that's been very challenging for me. My husband, who also, he doesn't own the business, but he's a part of the business in that he does do some of the research and development and ops. I've had to bring him into these meetings or with my manager, whereas I feel like I should be able to handle that, but if that other person is not comfortable, how do you move forward then? So I think that's been one of my bigger issues. kind of alongside that too, when we first opened, I was trying to find a way to relate to my employees and to also make them feel comfortable with me just as a person in general. And I think some of that I bring to the table. Like, we had a lot of like younger high school students working as delivery guys at the beginning, and I almost was like acting like a second mom to them. So I had to kind of cut myself off and step back and say, okay, you know, you're their boss, and yes, you do want to help them, but that's not necessarily the role you should be playing in their lives.
So how did you overcome that issue, that awkwardness of being seen as kind of a maternal figure, but actually being the boss?
So in the beginning, it was basically me working at the restaurant, 18 hours a day, 7 days a week. It definitely helped once I started to be able to step back and bring a manager on, and then pass on those responsibilities to him at the time. That was a way for me to actually just, okay, step back. If anything comes to like a dire situation or crucial need, then they can come to me. But it was just a layer in between, and I feel like that also set some boundaries too, some reasonable boundaries. It's still a struggle. So now I do have another manager who's been with us for a long time, and like I said, now I don't think it's so much of my issue how I deal with it. It's getting the other side, so my male employees, to feel comfortable with me and bringing things to me that may need to be sorted through or sorted out. That is something I'm continually working on. I'm working on being as transparent as we can in the company. I think that what's helped is a lot of my employees have been with us. Most of my average time with my employees with us is like 6+ years. So we've been in business for 12 years. So for a restaurant, that's actually a really good statistic, which is great for us. But just kind of honing those skills over time, and not always, I don't want to default to someone else. Yes, it's great to have the manager in there, but we have to figure out how to work together and communicate together. So just putting yourself through uncomfortable situations and making sure that, okay, this may be uncomfortable, but we're going to work through it and get to a point where we can communicate properly.
Sarita, I want to talk more about a macro issue and talk a little bit about financing. So, in our own internal studies, we have found that women are generally approved at a lower rate, and when they are approved, it's for less money than their male counterparts are. Is that something that you've experienced yourself in your own business?
So being around for 12 years, we've gone through like some ups and downs, but at the very beginning, we were trying to get funding for opening the first restaurant. So I'm in a situation, there's a couple of factors going on here. First off, I'm opening a restaurant, which is a very risky business. So to get any kind of traditional funding right off the bat without any history is very tough regardless. I'm a woman-owned business, and I'm a person of color. So there's a lot of factors here. I feel like at the beginning, most of my rejection reasons were because it's a restaurant, because it's a restaurant, because it's a restaurant. So then after establishing a reasonably well-known restaurant in our first few years of operation, it still was very hard for us to get funding. Again, because it's, oh, well, you haven't been in business long enough. You haven't, you only have one restaurant. So it's like this kind of recurring theme, and that was the reasoning that was given to me. At the time, I bought it. Like, I bought that was the reasoning. Looking back now, I'm like, oh, maybe there was different reasoning to it. Also, when you tell me that these statistics are true, I haven't heard of them, but it doesn't surprise me, and it doesn't shock me, and it's very sad to say, but yes, that I wouldn't be surprised about these statistics because of everything that we know and what's going on and what's getting unveiled and revealed. And at the end of the day, when I look at it, who's deciding on these loans? If you look at the demographic of banks and who's working at banks, mostly male dominated, very few people of color. There's a lot. I feel like there are a lot of factors, and is it intentional? Who knows? But is it who people feel comfortable with, who people can relate to? So when you're sitting around a table and saying, okay, I want to fund $500,000 to someone, are they going to give it to this woman of color that they don't really have any kind of history or knowledge about, or someone who looks like and acts like them? I think that there's a lot of that to factor in too.
Sarita, I think you bring up an important topic. You eventually got the capital and you got the funding that you needed. Do you feel that you got the amount that you deserved based on your credit? And if so, where did you get it?
So in the earlier years of business, I did push with my bank, and I got various microloans. They were all pretty small, micro, and they weren't necessarily the amounts I needed. When I got a little bit of a larger amount, it was really a bank rep that I feel like he was fighting for me. Honestly, he was just pushing it and pushing and pushing it to whoever was higher up in the food chain of the bank. But that was also, he visited the restaurant a number of times. He really believed in the concept. He really believed in the idea. He believed in the small business owner. So it took that much pushing to get still a micro loan, right? So it's still, that kind of speaks for itself. Then, there's, I guess it's relatively new type of funding, this online marketplace, all these different players in the business came to light, and I started researching that, looking into that, and it was like all of a sudden, some barriers were pushed down and taken away, because now it's a very clear, what are your requirements, like paper documents as far as bank statements and business history, but it takes away a lot of the, I think, subjectivity of this, and also your requirements sometimes aren't so stringent as the banks. My credit was good, but it wasn't awesome, and I hadn't been in business at that time for so long, so some of those factors are pulled out of it. I guess the advantage of bank loans is, typically when you get one, you can get one with perhaps at a lower interest rate, but if you're not going to get it, what's the point? To me, I was like, I don't want to pay a crazy amount of interest, but I can also negotiate that, and I don't. And at the end of the day, we need the money. We need the money for working capital or expansion or whatever, whatever it may be. So however you slice it, if you need the money, you need the money, and you need to have outlets to actually apply to and be treated fairly to be considered for this money.
So in your opinion, would you say that it's kind of twofold? There's a layer of discrimination, and it might also be that women are a little bit fearful of asking for the capital that they deserve?
Yeah, I think it can be twofold. I also think that, it's interesting that you use the word fearful, because ever since I was a child, I was pretty outgoing, pretty, what I think to be pretty confident kid, and entering this world of owning my own business and being an entrepreneur, I can actually now think back to some of this fear you're talking about. When I first came up with the idea, and then my husband really believed in it too, and then it was like, okay, the first step to take was, what would it take to open up a business? I'd never opened up a business before. He had never opened up a business before. And so one of the big things was actually just talking to other business owners. And we were walking around the East Village, and I remember how scared I was to walk in and talk to owners of businesses. And looking back on that now, I'm like, who was that person? But there's this, I don't know, it's almost like this realm where you live, where it's like, well, even though I thought, I think and I am a pretty confident person, well, are they going to start questioning me, or do they think I could do this? All these, the self-doubt comes into play. And is it because a lot of these places you're walking into are mostly male-owned? Possibly, that could be part of it. I remember feeling pretty comfortable in a few of the female-owned businesses that we went to, that I could talk to them right away, more so than some of the other businesses. But I think that's kind of a piece of advice that I would love to just inject out there is, if you're ever looking to do something or open up your own business, don't ever be scared to talk to people, because at the end of the day, what I found out is most people actually want to tell their story, and most people who are actually living it, especially if it's very new, need to tell their story and need to get things off their chest and talk about it. And I just recently, literally as of last night, started this Lower East Side restaurant gab session. I call it the gab session and camaraderie, with people who literally live just within a couple blocks of where I live in the Lower East Side. And these, some of these people have been in businesses and owned restaurants or managed restaurants for close to 15, 20 years. and they had never been a part of that before. And I was like, why aren't these things happening? Why aren't people feeling confident enough? And a lot of them, 50% of this group is women. And I'm like, why aren't things like this being done? And I think it really is, if you don't have anyone to model or see, then you don't really think of yourself doing it too. So at this point, I just want people to feel comfortable. And guess what? If someone doesn't want to talk, so what? They say no. But you move on. Just go to the next place to talk to someone. But for the most part, it's just really having that faith in yourself and that belief, and just doing it, like walking up and just doing it.
Yeah, kind of have to just quiet your inner voice that's telling you no.
Exactly.
Do it anyway. So you talk about, how seeing the other female entrepreneurs was an inspiration to you and kind of gave you what you needed to make that leap of faith yourself. Was that something that you'd like to see more of in the restaurant industry, just women coming forward and kind of offering themselves up as mentors?
I think women offering themselves up as mentors in the restaurant industry is a fabulous thing. It is such a male-dominated industry, and my background is engineering, as you know, but I have befriended quite a few female chefs, and just some of their stories and how they've made it through the ranks and had to really push to make it through the ranks. And some of these women have worked at like the best restaurants, and their resume is like 4 pages thick of like amazement, and they're still unknown. I know them as friends, but it's like you don't read about them on publications, or you don't see them on these all these cooking shows and things like that. And so for in this industry, we need not just owners, but chefs and managers and anyone who's kind of gone through the ranks to show up and speak, because I think that a lot of the time they're just, not only are their voices not heard, they're just never asked either. If you're never asked to do something, then are you going to be the first person to try and like get through that door? Like, you probably haven't even thought about making it your way through that door.
Yeah. What's some advice that you would give to other women so that they can advocate for themselves?
Yeah, advice to advocate for themselves. I think you touched on something really strong, is that inner voice that we all have in our heads that says, "Oh, how can you do that? Why can't you do that?" Yeah, we need to shut that out. But also, something that would really help is, just go and seek and see what women have done. And when you actually start looking around and you find these amazing stories, they're inspirational, and there should be so many more of them, because there's all these people in the woodwork who have great stories. They just haven't come out yet. So really, it's a matter of educating yourself a bit, and then that brings the inspiration too. You need the inspiration to move forward. Again, I've been in this business for 12 years. I've had some awesome days and I've had some awful days. So there's got to be some kind of inspiration to keep pushing you forward.
Okay, well, thank you so much for coming on to the show today. This was very insightful.
Thank you.
My name is Manisha Priyadarshan, and this has been another episode of She Means Business.